Poverty is not simply about money, and that's the message from the United Nations, which has released a new report looking at global poverty rates. Using factors like health, education, and standard of living rather than income, the UN has shown an enormous disparity between rich and poor. It also found some countries in Asia, India and Bangladesh in particular, have made considerable progress over the last decade, as Nick Harper reports from the UN in New York.
The UN argues how you live is as important as how much you earn. New figures show 1.3 billion people are what the UN calls multidimensionally poor. It means they struggle in multiple areas, with the UN assessing their health, that's nutrition and child mortality rates, their education and their standard of living, whether they have electricity, adequate housing, drinking water and sanitation. Introducing this alternative way of examining the data, the UN argued it provides more accurate results that can be better acted upon.
This is a problem that we all need to be aware of, that we need to care about. It is amongst us, wherever we live in the world, and if we don't deal with it, it starts tearing us apart, whether in our families, in our communities, in our countries, or indeed as a global community.
Of the 5 Asian countries the UN highlighted, Bangladesh had the highest poverty rate of 42%, followed by Pakistan with 38%, Cambodia 37%, India 28%, and Vietnam dramatically less, with just 5% of the population considered poor. The report's not that long, a mere 20 pages, but contained within that is a vast amount of analysis. They looked at data from over a decade, from 101 different countries. The report authors say that allows them to go beyond the averages, averages that often mask realities, realities that can present a surprisingly positive picture. India, for example, has cut its poverty rate in half in a decade. Bangladesh's rate fell almost 20%.
It is a very good news story. It's remarkable progress, not only, once again, on average, but also it's a progress that is manifest across regions. The regions that in India had higher levels of multidimensional poverty to begin with, at the beginning of the period under analysis, are the ones that made more rapid progress in reducing poverty. Progress in Asia has been significant, but with 1 in 3 children worldwide still considered multidimensionally poor, the UN says there's still much more to do. Nick Harper, CNA, New York.
And for more on this, we're crossing into Pedro Conceicao in New York City, and he is director of the Human Development Office at the United Nations Development Program. Pedro, thanks for speaking to us. First up, 3 Asian countries, they were identified as having the fastest poverty reduction rates. India was at the top of that list. So, question is, what kinds of improvements have we observed, though?
Improvements have been remarkable, not only on average, for the average multidimensional poverty in the country, but also within all the countries that we analyzed. And more importantly, we found that those regions within countries that were lagging the most were the ones that made more progress. So this is a very good story of aggregate progress at the national level, but also very rapid progress within countries for those regions that were most behind when it comes to multidimensional poverty.
Now, Cambodia came in second just after India. What do we know about their poverty reduction efforts?
It's a very similar story to the one that I described for India. In all the countries that we analyzed, with the 10 countries for which we analyzed the changes in poverty over time, we see that there is a convergence in the progress towards reducing poverty. In other words, those regions that had the highest levels of poverty were the ones in which the progress towards reducing poverty was highest in all the countries that we analyzed in Asia. So it's a very comparable story across the Asian countries that we analyzed.
Pedro, what were some of the other findings from the report that perhaps stood out for you?
Well, one of the things that is quite new in the report this year was that we looked not only at the disparities in poverty rates within countries, so I already spoke of these difference rates of progress within countries across different regions, but even within households. And one of the striking findings of the report is that within the same household, under the same roof, you can actually have disparities across people. You can have in the same household one child that is malnourished living along with at least one child that is not malnourished. And these findings are very important for policies that seek to reduce poverty. It's not the same thing to have a policy that seeks to reduce poverty in which everyone in the household is in the same circumstances, as opposed to a situation in which different people under the same roof are having different experiences when it comes to poverty.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, Pedro Conceicao from New York City there, the UN Development Program.